With the recent 8th anniversary artwork for Pokemon Go including a Dynamax version of Wartortle, the next big update to Pokemon Go is likely to be the Dynamax and Gigantamax system. And in this video I will be going through 5 things you missed about Dynamax and Gigantamax in Pokemon Go, including hints in the in-game code on how it's going to work, and small updates that have already been made to the game in preparation for its arrival. But first, what exactly is Dynamax and Gigantamax and why should you be bothered about it? First introduced in Generation 8 games, Pokemon Sword and Shield, Dynamax is a temporary transformation that greatly increases the size of a Pokemon, it increases the HP, and allows it to use special moves called max moves. The amount of HP a Pokemon gains when Dynamax depends on its Dynamax level, which could be increased with Dynamax Candy. And the special max moves that a Pokemon can use whilst in this state depends on the type of moves it already knows. But there is another version of Dynamax that only a short list of Pokemon can undergo. This variant of Dynamax is called Gigantamax, and as well as increasing the size and the HP of a Pokemon, this phenomena changes the appearance of the Pokemon as well, and it allows them to use exclusive moves known as G-Max moves. But which Pokemon have Gigantamax forms? So there are currently 32 species of Pokemon that can Gigantamax, and those Pokemon are Charizard, Butterfree, Pikachu, Meowth, Machamp, Gengar, Kingler, Lapras, Eevee, Snorlax, Garbodor, Melmetal, Corviknight, Orbeetle, Dreadnought, Colossal, Flapple, Appleton, Sandaconda, Toxtricity, Centiskorch, Hatterene, Grimmsnarl, Alcremie, Copperajah, Duraludon, Venusaur, Blastoise, Rillaboom, Cinderace, Inteleon, and Urshifu. And whilst a lot of these Pokemon aren't actually in Pokemon Go yet, it's likely that some of them will be introduced alongside the Dynamax system, and when the Dynamax system is in the game, these Pokemon will be slowly released. So now you know what Dynamaxing and Gigantamaxing is, but what have you missed when it comes to its implementation into Pokemon Go? Firstly, the 8th anniversary artwork featuring the giant Wartortle. With the untrained eye, if you didn't actually know what Dynamax and Gigantamax is, you might have missed the hint. And the easiest way to tell it is Dynamax, apart from the size of the Pokemon, is the clouds circling its head and the ominous purple and black anomaly in the sky above. But that's not the only hint towards Dynamax in this picture. Although quite small and hard to see, we also have all 3 of the Galar Starters featuring, which haven't yet been released in Pokemon Go. But why haven't they been released yet, even when the Gen 9 starters are already in the game? Well, most likely the reason that these are the only starters that haven't been added to the game yet, as well as a lot of the Pokemon from the Galar region, is because Niantic have been waiting to add them alongside the release of the Dynamax and Gigantamax feature. And with the fact that a lot of these Galar Pokemon actually do have Gigantamax forms, Niantic is probably waiting for this feature to be in the game so they can release the Pokemon alongside their Gigantamax form. And while it could have taken Niantic a while to develop this feature, they could also have been waiting to implement it at a certain point of the game so they can space it out from other updates to maintain hype over a longer period of time. This has also been reinforced by Niantic's Michael Steranka, who recently commented on the excitement of Niantic to add the rest of the Galar region into Pokemon Go, and said that they are waiting for the correct time to do so, which I would assume is when they have the Dynamax and Gigantamax system sorted, which could be sooner rather than later, especially taking into account some of the other hints that you might have missed, including a new type of raid and a point of interest being built in the back end of the game. And there are also some changes that have been made to Pokemon Go that are live now that do hint towards the feature coming pretty soon. So what are these new type of raids and the new point of interest? Well, data miners have found a lot of code that is being referred to with code names. Firstly, the code name Bread seems to refer to Dynamax, and the code name Bread Dough seems to refer to Gigantamax. There are lines of code such as join Bread Lobby, leave Bread Lobby, and get Bread Lobby details that all appear to be some kind of Dynamax raid that is slowly being built in the code. The code also appears to show that you will be able to upgrade the Dynamax Pokemon with a type of currency, which I imagine will be the system for increasing a Pokemon's Dynamax level like the main series games, and the currency could be Dynamax Candy or something similar that players will have to earn to upgrade their Pokemon's Dynamax level. The code also shows some new type of moves that are being added to the game, which could possibly be Dynamax Max moves and the Gigantamax G-Max moves. But how and where will these Dynamax raids take place in Pokemon Go? According to the data mines, it seems they will be taking place in stations, which are a new point of interest that will appear on the overworld map like Pokestops and gyms do currently. These will mostly be something similar to raid dens in Pokemon Sword and Shield, which are the places that you do the Dynamax and Gigantamax raids in those games. Data miners have also found what stations actually look like in the in-game code. The stations appear to look like a Galar region Pokemon Stadium where Dynamax and Gigantamax Pokemon gym battles take place in the mainline games. There are also pieces of code that indicate you will have to walk a certain amount of distance to be able able to interact with these stations. It's quite possible that you might have to walk to build up a certain amount of currency that you can then use to interact with the station in some way, but it is hard to tell at the moment. It isn't 100% clear whether stations will be separate structures on the overworld map, or whether Pokestops or gyms do in fact turn into them, like how gyms host raid battles. But this image from the Pokemon group does seem to suggest that the stations will be in fact on or part of Pokestops. So it is likely that these Dynamax raids will randomly appear on random Pokestops like how raids appear on gyms. To be honest, it would make more sense to have Pokestops host these like gyms, because the Pokestops are already there in the game and it would be easier to attach a feature to Pokestops instead of the raid dens having their own separate structure on the overworld map, which I imagine would take a lot more work to implement. It does also look like you will be able to get items and research from these stations in some way as well. It's also worth noting that the data mines have indicated that the Today tab, where we can already see what Pokemon you have in gyms and in showcases etc., will be updated to allow us to view and interact with stations and stationed Pokemon in a similar way to how we currently interact with showcases and the Pokemon that we have in them. While all of this does point to Dynamax and Gigantamax raid battles in raid dens, this isn't confirmed because these are just data mines and they can be changed at any point. Alongside all of this going on in the in-game code, there is actually some indications of Dynamax and Gigantamax already in the game that are easy to miss. So recently there has been an update to the user interface for the Pokemon stats screen, where the icon that indicates the time left on Mega Evolution has been moved to its own separate space on the stat screen. And it does seem likely that it has been moved there so when released, the Dynamax icon can sit alongside it if a Pokemon is eligible for both Mega Evolution and Dynamax. This is likely because the previous location of the Mega Evolution symbol was in an area that doesn't really have any room near it for another type of modification for a Pokemon like Dynamax. Now they will be able to be grouped together, and they could also be accompanied by other things, like for example the ability to use Z moves introduced in Gen 7 and the ability to terrestrialize introduced in Gen 9, and both will no doubt make its way into the game in the future and will most likely be grouped with Mega Evolution and Dynamax. With all of that said, if you do want to know what are the best Pokemon to power up in Pokemon Go, then I recommend checking out this video next.